This might actually be the darkest scene in the entire Godfather trilogy. And I don't mean dark in the obvious way, I mean the kind that most people completely miss, even after watching it a dozen times. Because this is the scene where you realize, the man you started rooting for, the man who carries himself with such quiet dignity, who seems almost too refined for the world that he operates in, is absolutely ruthless. He's willing to, let's just say, take extensive measures to get what he wants, no matter how inhumane. But here's the complexity that makes this story so compelling. The man on the receiving end, he's much worse. Jack Waltz, powerful, connected, untouchable, is a predator hiding behind a suit and a smile. And what you're about to watch is one predator being handled by another, except one of them you never saw coming. This is the Woltz scene, and it goes so much deeper than what's on the surface. Because beneath it all, beneath the polished manners, the private dinners, the million-dollar house, a world of powerful men, private arrangements, and secrets that can't be allowed to surface, a world where influence is everything and consequences only exist for people who can't afford to make them disappear. Sound familiar? Secret files, private islands, the whole thing. The Godfather was made in 1972, but what it was warning us about, we're watching it play out right now. And in the middle of all of it, sent in alone, no weapons, no backup, is one man, not carrying a gun, just a briefcase, and the confidence of someone who knows exactly whose name he's walking in with. Tom Hagen. Now, Tom is one of the most underrated characters in the entire trilogy. But wherever you look, whatever the crisis, whatever the negotiation, he's somehow right in the middle of it. The Sollozzo deal? Hagen's the one sent to handle it. Senator Geary years later? Hagen's the one who quietly puts that senator on a leash. Oh, it made him so formidable, and what you can take from it, as well as breaking down one of the most chilling, most layered scenes in the entire trilogy. A scene that on the surface looks like a business negotiation, but underneath is something far more sinister than most people will ever realize. So sit back, light up your cigar, pour yourself a cup of Don Cortado. Hey, and do me a favor, this one's as controversial as it gets and it might get buried. Don't be a stonad. Take out that like and hit the subscribe button and drop Inner Circle in the comments. Let's hit 10,000 likes. Loyalty like that does not go unnoticed. Come on, before... Part 1. Woltz. What was happening? The mission. It's the wedding day of Connie Corleone. The garden is full, the wine is flowing, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, a man named Johnny Fontaine is on his way from Los Angeles to beg his godfather for help. The novel is where we need to look to really understand what was going on behind that smooth, polished appearance he makes in the film. Puzo introduces us to Fontaine before we even meet the Don properly. It's 4 a.m. in a Los Angeles hotel suite. Fontaine is drunk, sprawled on a couch, drinking straight from a bottle of scotch. His career is in freefall. The friends who used to love his calls at 4 a.m. now find him boring. His second wife is out, and when she finally walks in the door, things get worse. He hits her, she laughs at him. This is Johnny Fontaine's life right now. Once one of the most beloved entertainers in America, a singer whose voice made women weep, whose records sold millions, he is now watching everything slip away. The thing that made him Johnny Fontaine no longer works. Without it, no records, no concert dates, nothing. The only road left open to him is acting. And there's one role in one movie being produced by one man, Jack Waltz. Waltz has even admitted Fontaine would be perfect for the part, but he's refused him anyway. In fact, he blacklisted Fontaine from Hollywood. That was the impenetrable wall. Now, to understand why the Don gets involved, you need to understand the relationship. The bond between Johnny Fontaine and Vito Corleone goes back to birth. The Don held the infant Johnny in his arms at his baptism. When Johnny's father died, Corleone assumed the duties of parenthood. In their world, that wasn't sentiment, it was a sacred obligation, as binding as blood. You don't let your godson drown when you have the power to save him. But there was something else, too. The Don had a genuine soft spot for Johnny, even when Johnny disappointed him, and Johnny disappointed him often. When Fontaine sat in that office, broken and weeping, asking what he should do, the Don grabbed him by the face and told him to And yet, in that same moment, Puzo tells us that Don reflected on how much he loved his godson. Here is where it gets interesting. Hagen didn't particularly rate Johnny Fontaine. When we see the two of them together later in the novel, Puzo tells us there was a coolness between them. Fontaine had never forgiven Hagen for blocking his access to the Don during a difficult period, and Hagen, for his part, watched Fontaine drink himself through a conversation and sat there with his mouth curled up with distaste. He told him plainly, drinking won't help your voice. Fontaine told him where to go. Hagen's face went smoothly impassive, and he simply said, "Okay, I'll keep this purely business." That was his private view, a talented man squandering himself, but a blueprint for a ruthless self-invention. At 10 years old, Woltz was hustling empty beer kegs and push carts on the east side of New York. At 20, he was sweating garment workers alongside his father. At 30, he left New York, moved west, invested in the Nickelodeon, and helped pioneer motion pictures from the ground up. By 48, he was the most powerful movie magnate in Hollywood, and Puzo doesn't dress it up. He describes him as rough-spoken, rapaciously amorous, a raging wolf ravaging helpless flocks of young starlets. That was Woltz at the height of his power, raw, predatory, unapologetic. Then at 50, he did something remarkable. He decided to become a different man entirely. Speech lessons, an English valet to teach him how to dress, an English butler to teach him how to behave in society. When his first wife died, he married a world-famous actress. By 60, he was collecting old master paintings, sitting on the president's advisory committee, running a multi-million-dollar foundation promoting art and film. His daughter married an English lord. His son married an Italian princess. The man had erased himself and rebuilt from scratch twice. Now, his connections. On paper, they were formidable. He sat on the president's advisory council for war information. He had dinner at the White House. He entertained J. Edgar Hoover, the most powerful law enforcement figure in the country, as a personal guest in his Hollywood home. He owned his own studio with dozens of stars under contract. He had a union boss, Billy Goff, on his payroll for $100,000 a year under the table. But here's what Hagen clocks immediately, sitting on that plane going through everything he knows. Those connections, impressive as they sound, were all official relationships, not personal power. Woltz didn't have real political muscle, partly because he was an extreme reactionary, and partly because he was a megalomaniac who wielded power so wildly that he'd spent a career creating enemies. Hoover wasn't going to war for him. The White House wasn't going to war for him either. And yet, when Hagen finally walks into that office, these were two men cut from the same cloth who had built empires through force of will. The difference was that one of them understood the world he was in, and the other was about to find out he didn't. Why Woltz hated Fontaine. The dispute. Okay, before we get into the meeting itself, we need to understand why Woltz hated Fontaine in the first place, because without that, none of what follows makes sense. Woltz had spent 5 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars building a girl into a star. Then Johnny Fontaine came along with his charm, and she left. That's it. That's the reason. A man who built an empire from nothing, who dined at the White House, who had the FBI director as a personal guest, brought to this point by wounded pride. He couldn't let it go, and now it didn't matter that the part was perfect for Johnny. Woltz admits that himself. It didn't matter that it would make him a star. None of that mattered. What mattered was the principle. Nobody makes Jack Woltz look ridiculous and walk away clean. For Hagen, this was the most revealing moment of the entire evening, because in the Corleone world, business was business, kept completely separate from personal grievance. The idea that a man of Woltz's stature could let pride override judgment on a decision of this size was almost inconceivable to him. But it also told him something important. You cannot reason with a man whose ego is doing the thinking. That required a different kind of conversation entirely, one that wasn't Hagen's to have, especially after what Hagen accidentally discovers after. Have a look at this.
I told him never to go out of the room.
Right. Is this Waltz so tough?
Well, he'd risk a union slowdown. He let that star actor be exposed as a junkie.
But I mean, is he really tough? Would he risk his honor for this,
I mean, he's a Sicilian. Forget about it.
And this little actress, this child. Is that true? Hey, Famia. All right, send Luca Brazzi to me. I think we're gonna find a way to reason with this Mr. Jack Woltz.
What's really going on? Part 2. Overall character analysis. The type of person he was. Overall aura. The first thing you need to understand about Tom Hagen is the type of man he was, because everything else flows from it. Tom was calm and collected, but not in a passive way. It was deliberate, it was trained, it was a choice he made every single time. And what makes the novel so fascinating is that Puzo humanizes him enough that we actually get to see behind the mask. There are moments when Tom gets irritated, frustrated, even wounded. When Sonny implies he isn't really family after the Don gets shot, Hagen fires back immediately. When Michael demotes him, Puzo tells us his face reddened. He felt things deeply. But here's what's crucial. That was all within the family, behind closed doors. The moment he stepped outside, the mask was back on and it never slipped. In front of Waltz, in front of Sollozzo, in front of a room full of capo regimes, watching to see how he'd react to being stripped of his title. Nothing. Impassive, quiet confidence. And that composure wasn't just personality, it was philosophy. Tom had heard the Don say once that a lawyer with his briefcase can steal more than 100 men with guns. He took that line and built his entire identity around it. He didn't need to be feared in the way soldiers are feared. He didn't need muscle or menace. He needed to walk into any room in the world, composed and unremarkable, and make things happen through intelligence, patience, and the weight of what stood behind him. That's the aura. Ordinary on the surface, immovable underneath. But let's go deeper. Let's see what gave Tom that edge. Key characteristics that gave him an edge. 1. He read every room before he walked into it. Before Hagen even lands in LA, he's already done his homework on Woltz, his political connections, his relationship with Hoover, the labor trouble, the drug-addicted star. He boards that plane with a full picture. But what separates him isn't just preparation, it's that he never stops reading once he arrives. At the studio, before a single word is spoken, he clocks the appointment is at 10 a.m. rather than lunch. Puzo tells us his immediate interpretation. It meant that Woltz held him in small worth. Most people would just show up and wait. Hagen extracts his standing in the room from the time slot alone. Then, that afternoon, when Woltz's secretary calls to invite him to the estate, she mentions Woltz will get him to the airport in the morning, meaning Woltz already knows his return flight. Hagen hadn't told him that. He pauses on it. His conclusion? Woltz had set private detectives on his trail. And if Woltz investigated him, Woltz now knows he represents Don Corleone, which means he's finally taking the whole thing seriously. In one phone call, Hagen has completely revised his read of the situation. Something might be done after all. Then, at the estate over dinner, Woltz finally reveals his real reason for hating Fontaine. A girl he'd been grooming for years left him for Fontaine and made him look ridiculous. To most people, that's just a backstory. To Hagen, it's a diagnosis. A man running a $100 million studio who makes business decisions based on a bruised ego is a man who can't be broken, not by reason, but by something that frightens him even more deeply. He can't be persuaded, but he can be made to feel what it's like to be truly powerless. That insight goes straight back to the Don. The whole day is one continuous act of reading. Studio, phone call, estate, dinner. Each location gives him new information and he updates his picture every step of the way. That's the edge. 2. He never got angry, even when he was supposed to. This is the one Puzo spells out most explicitly, and it's worth giving it its full due. When Woltz explodes at Tom, threatening him with Hoover and the other colorful language he used, Hagen's internal response isn't anger. This came from the Don's teaching. Never get angry, never make a threat, reason with people. But what makes it powerful is that Hagen doesn't just suppress anger, he converts the moment into useful information. Anger in someone else tells you exactly who they are and where they're vulnerable. Hagen knew that, and so he chose not to give Woltz a clue of what he was thinking. 3. He understood his role exactly and never overstepped it. This is subtle, but it's one of his most important qualities. He boards that plane already knowing he probably can't persuade Woltz. He isn't going there to win, he's going there to be the contact, to deliver the message with enough dignity that it gets taken seriously, and to report back accurately. He didn't go off on a limb making real threats by using the Don's name.
I'm gonna make so much trouble for you, you won't know what hit
Mr.
you.
Waltz, I'm a lawyer. I have not threatened. I know.
But this goes even further. When asked by the Don about Woltz, "You're asking if he's a Sicilian, no?" That's the whole answer. He translated the Don's question correctly. Not, does Woltz have courage, or does Woltz have willpower, but will Woltz risk everything on a matter of honor? He understood the Don's thinking so precisely he could interpret what the Don actually meant, rather than what he literally said, saving himself and the Don having to go back and forth unnecessarily. That's a rare quality. The consigliere was described by Puzo as the Don's auxiliary brain, and Hagen earned that title. 4. His invisibility was a weapon. Puzo describes him as very ordinary looking, and that ordinariness is deliberate. This comes when you acquire true, quiet confidence, not the cringy surface-level stuff you might see guys try to portray on social media, but the kind you can feel when you're around it. I really like how Tom put it in the novel. Listen to this. "I understand you have to deal with a lot of people who try to seem more important than they are. In my case, the reverse is true." He understands that he comes across as ordinary. In fact, that's the whole idea. He lets Woltz underestimate him. He lets the whole world underestimate him, because to him, that's what will give him the upper hand. The other families called the Corleones the Irish gang because of him, and rather than being wounded by it, Puzo tells us it simply amused Hagen. He understood that being underestimated was an advantage, not an insult. 5. His forensic intelligence. He noticed everything. The Lampone detail is the clearest proof of this. Without being told anything, without being in the loop, Hagen noticed that everyone Lampone was hiring was slightly too qualified for the job they were given and being paid slightly more than the job was worth. He reconstructed an entire secret operation from payroll anomalies. When he lays it out to Michael, Michael admits, not so damn perfect if you noticed. The Don had actually predicted Hagen would spot it and told Michael so. It wasn't surveillance or insider information, it was pure pattern recognition. He saw what others couldn't because he was always watching. His weaknesses. Now, if there's any weakness, not a Sicilian and not a wartime consigliere. But it wasn't as simple as it sounds, and I don't want to just throw that label around without unpacking it, because before we can judge Tom on that, we need to figure out what makes a good consigliere in general, what the role actually demands, what it looks like when it's done right. And then narrow it down further. What does a wartime consigliere specifically need that a peacetime one doesn't? What does a Sicilian consigliere have that Tom fundamentally lacks? Are those even two different jobs, or is it just the same job under pressure, and Tom simply couldn't handle the pressure? These are the questions that we need to look into. So if that's something you're interested in, we'll get deeper into whether Tom was actually a good consigliere in a later video, because that deserves its own conversation. Because comment below if you want to see that, and really, I'm curious to know what you think. Part 4. Dedication to Robert Duvall. As you may be aware by now, we recently lost one of the greatest to ever do it. Robert Duvall passed away on February 15th, 2026, at the age of 95, and I wanted to dedicate this video to his memory, both to the man himself and to the character he brought to life in a way that nobody else could have. Tom Hagen exists the way we know him because of Robert Duvall, full stop. Now, his body of work is one of the most remarkable in the history of American cinema. 7 decades, over 90 films, an Oscar, 7 nominations. The man didn't have a weak performance in him. From Boo Radley in To Kill a Mockingbird to Lieutenant Colonel Kilgore in Apocalypse Now, delivering one of the most iconic lines ever put to film.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
Lonesome Dove, The Apostle, The Great Santini, Network, Open Range, Secondhand Lions. And then in 2014, well into his 80s, he stepped onto a set with Robert Downey Jr. for The Judge and reminded everyone exactly who they were dealing with. 2 of the most magnetic screen presences of their respective generations playing an estranged father and son. Nobody had mixed feelings about Duvall. He earned his 7th and final Oscar nomination for that performance at 84 years old, the oldest acting nominee in Academy history. Downey himself said that every time he had a scene with Duvall, he had to bring everything he had just to keep up. That's the kind of actor he was. He didn't just hold his own, he raised the level of everyone around him. In films packed wall to wall with the biggest stars in the world, Brando, Pacino, De Niro, Hackman, Downey, Duvall still managed to be one of the brightest lights in the room, not by demanding your attention, but with that suave, quiet confidence that we've spent this whole video talking about. He was Tom Hagen. The stillness, the control, the ability to say everything while appearing to say nothing. Your eye found him because he was always the realest person in the frame. He could do it all. That was the gift. He never showed you the work, he just showed you the truth. Rest easy, Mr. Duvall. This one's for you. Tom is one of the most underrated figures in the entire trilogy, and we've only scratched the surface. The full story is waiting for you. The character, where he came from, how he was built, and why he operated the way he did. Click here. Ciao. See you there.